Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." It's kind of interesting to think about that there's surprisingly a large number of characters that have some form of super strength as their power. It's not just in comic books or in forms of media that are based off of comic books, but pretty much any show, book, or movie that has characters with extraordinary abilities. There are so many characters with this type of power that there have been discussions made on the level of strength each of these characters have, and if they're able to defeat a certain character in a fight. I mean, there are some that are kind of like obvious, like, oh, you guys, if you think about them, they're definitely super strong, like Saitama from One Punch Man and the Hulk. And there are some that you kind of forget that they have super strength, or that it isn't the first power you think of when you think about this character, like Spider-Man, because Spider-Man, you'll usually think of either his spider sense or his wall crawling abilities, or Goku, mostly because of the Kamehameha and the spirit bomb technique. I think if that's what it's called. Yes, that's usually what most people think about. Even characters whose main power isn't super strength have scenes where they commit great acts of strength, like the Flash and his supersonic punch, which is basically a result of his super speed running fast enough that the force is basically similar to like someone being punched with super strength. It's probably because strength is a trait that people have been obsessed with since ancient times, regardless of whether it is physical or not. It isn't just seen with like ancient myths like the legends of Hercules, but also within ancient societies where strength was valued, like the Spartans, who valued a person's strength and ability to fight over everything. Didn't matter how smart they were, if you couldn't fight, you were considered to be weak and essentially worthless in that society. And you can even consider the fact that there are a variety of characters that either have super strength or some form of super strength to be a reference to society's obsession with strength. I mean, think about it. There's like mental strength, the strength of one's determination to fulfill their goals, and other references to strength that are something that people like to have and have been referenced throughout the years. Also, it seems that feats of strength seem to be greatly valued or considered impressive when it is performed either in a dire situation or against something that many people would normally struggle against. If you think about it, most people don't truly realize how strong a person is until they go against something that pushes their own strengths against their limits. Sure, there are times where it's impressive, where they are effortlessly completing something with their own strength. But at the same time, you don't really have a good idea of how strong they truly are until they're faced with a burden that is greater than what most people could handle, if they can even handle it at all. I mean, think about this show that came out recently, Physical 100. I think there's only 2 seasons of it. It's this like workout show where these contestants are all pushed to their limits. I mean, that show wouldn't probably have been as interesting if everyone was able to like easily complete all the trials and tasks. But the really impressive ones were the ones where everyone was struggling, everyone was having a hard time like moving something or catching up, or like you can see them like pushed to the limits. That's why the show is being so interesting, is because you get to see people who are, if you look at them, oh, these guys are strong, being pushed to the limit. The fact that someone with great strength is struggling helps show how serious the situation is And the fact that they are able to fully overcome it really shows the true extent of that strength. So this type of reasoning may lead to this type of question. What does it mean to be strong as a Christian? Another way to look at this question: who or what is a Christian's example of strength, or what it means to be strong? I mean, everyone has their own idea of what a strong person is, or an act of strength looks like, regardless of whether people agree with their idea. The only thing that they have in common is the fact that the idea they have represents their understanding of strength. Well, there are people in the Bible that do fit with most people's ideas of strength. As an example, like Samson and David. I mean, Samson was literally one of the strongest people in the world, and David was considered to be a strong warrior. Yet, are they really the best examples that we should take on what it means to be strong as a Christian? I mean, to be fair, those guys that I said before are strong, but are they really the best examples to take? Sure, they're also strong people in their own way, but there's actually someone else that is a better example, and that is Jesus Christ. The passage that we have read in Matthew 26 can be seen as a way to show the true strength of Jesus. Now, this may come as a surprise to those who read this passage, since it doesn't seem like a good example at all when you look at it at first glance. When you read it for the first time, it seems like this passage represents Jesus showing weakness and not strength. Odds are people will think of when Jesus cleansed the temple by driving out the people selling animals, letting loose all the animals that are being sacrificed with a cord of whips, while also standing up to the Pharisees as a better example of strength. It makes sense since this is like a physical feat of strength, and people have an easier time imagining those as a type of strength. But is that event, while also impressive, really the best reference to Jesus' strength? That type of event would make sense if you consider Jesus to be simply a rebel or a freedom fighter. But again, that type of definition limits Jesus' true nature. This only works within the limited mindset of the Pharisees and the other religious leaders of the time had of Jesus. While it's true it doesn't seem like it at first glance, put into consideration of the circumstances in which Jesus prays to God. When you look at the previous passage within Matthew 26, you can see that this happens right after the Last Supper. Not only that, but at the start of the chapter, it mentions that there were people plotting to kill Jesus, and that Judas Iscariot was willing to betray Jesus for some pieces of silver. Combined with Jesus going to pray to Gethsemane, this chapter can be seen as a climactic buildup before the final showdown that Jesus has to face. You know, that part in a movie, TV show, or book that helps us see the rise in stakes and the seriousness of what is about to happen. This is further shown when the passage mentions that Jesus begins to be sorrowful and troubled when he was in Gethsemane. By considering this chapter to be the climactic buildup before the final showdown, this can be seen as Jesus acknowledging the fact that his greatest trial is about to happen. Up to this point in time, we can consider Jesus to be portrayed with this type air of humble confidence throughout his earthly ministry. We have never seen him falter or back down from any challenges the Pharisees and other religious leaders would set forth in their attempts to discredit him. He dutifully taught the word of God to everyone, even though other people may have disagreed with the type of audience he would interact with during his earthly ministry. I mean, he interacted with lepers, everyone that everyone was afraid of, and even tax collectors who people thought were the worst of the worst among sinners. I mean, that requires some form of strength and bravery to do that type of stuff, especially if it goes against what everyone else thought. And again, while it may not seem like it at first glance when you read about it, Jesus already did a bunch of stuff that many people would have difficult doing, nor have the strength to do. Intentionally preaching to people that society thought were a lost cause that should be avoided and or forgotten, going against groups of people who have strong influence and authority within the community. Even the fact that he went everywhere on foot to preach the gospel would be something that people would have trouble with, even with modern transportation. I mean, anyone who's traveled for some place, whether for work or just for fun, knows how difficult traveling can be. And he did this all on foot. These types of things may not be the first thing that pops into your people's minds when they think of feats of strength, but you gotta admit that you definitely need to have some strong willpower to be able to intentionally go through these types of things. Otherwise, guys like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi wouldn't have been seen as impressive, nor would they have had the effect that they have, that is still known to this day, if these types of things were considered to be easy for a person to do. The fact that Jesus is feeling this way, even after all that he has done, helps emphasize that the next task he will perform is greater than all the others that he has done throughout his earthly ministry. Not only that, but we also see that even though he knows that his next task is greater than the ones that he has done, he still shows the willingness to complete it. This is shown within Jesus' prayer to God. Odds are most of us, when we have read this passage for the first time, the first part of the prayer where Jesus asks God if it was possible for the cup to pass from him is the part that probably catches our attention the most. Basically, it is Jesus' way of asking God if there was another way for him to complete this task. The fact that Jesus asked this makes it seem like he is faltering at his task, which is why people often miss the next part of the prayer. It also doesn't help that people don't have a good idea of what it means when Jesus mentions the cup. There are two things within the Old Testament that the cup is used to symbolize: being blessed and receiving salvation, or facing disaster and receiving wrath. In this case, I hope everyone understands this, the cup refers to the fact that Jesus will face the wrath and judgment of God that was meant for all of humanity because of their sinful state. Jesus knows that the only way that humanity is able to receive the gift of salvation is if God's wrath and judgment for their sinful state becomes appeased. The only way for that to even be possible is by Jesus allowing himself to be sacrificed upon their behalf. Due to our corrupt state, we are unable to appease God's wrath, which is why the Israelites were required to give burnt offerings daily as a reminder of their sinful state. Jesus was the only being who was born without sin, which is why he's the only one that fit the criteria, so to speak. With that in mind, it makes sense that Jesus would feel this way, even though with all that he had done throughout his earthly ministry. He pretty much started this task knowing that he will have to take on the entirety of God's wrath and judgment on the world in order to fulfill what he came to do. I mean, who wouldn't feel afraid of something like that? Think of it this way. You know how there are characters in shows that are able to complete like these incredible feats when you see them, only for you to find out later that they were either having hold back their true strength the entire time, either to avoid collateral damage like All Might from My Hero Academia, or because they never felt the need to go out, like Toguro from Yu Yu Hakusho. That one's probably a bad example, but yeah, pretty much this guy, he's like able to adjust his strength every time, and he usually only uses about like 10 or 20% because that's all he needs to like beat up someone or to kill someone because it's a hunter. Now, with that in mind, compare what Jesus would face to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is also an example of God's wrath. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah would have been basically, in this case, a microscopic example of the wrath of God compared to what Jesus would face by bearing all the sins of the world. Pretty much comparing a revolver to a nuke, what Jesus is about to face. So yeah, you could see, by putting that in mind, this is something that's very serious, and many people would probably be scared of it or probably try to run away or not even bother to start in the first place. Yet, Jesus shows that he isn't faltering in his task because he also says that if it is God's will, then he will do what he has come to do. Even though there is a part of Jesus that desires that the event to come does not happen, that doesn't mean he will outright disobey God if it is according to God's will. Not only that, but this is the only part of the prayer that he says when he prays for a second and third time. The fact that he repeated this part 3 times acts as a way for us to see that Jesus' conviction and determination to go through with what needs to be done. Even though it will be a painful and terrible burden to bear, Jesus shows that he will not allow that to stop him from taking on the sins of the world and face the wrath of God. This is also shown when in the last 2 verses of this passage, where he tells Peter, James, and John they're about to meet his betrayer. Odds are the disciples thought that Jesus was either testing the resolve or simply stating that there was a possibility that someone might betray them, not realizing that he actually meant that this will be happening soon. Even though Jesus knew that this would happen, he didn't do anything to stop it, nor did he command his disciples to prepare for it. Even when one of them tried to stop them from taking Jesus by drawing his sword and cutting off an ear of a servant of the high priest, Jesus told them to stop and heal this injured man. Jesus knew that this was something that he had to do willingly, which is why you could even say that he was essentially annoyed by the fact that they were armed as if he was going to resist his capture with brute force, that he wasn't going to go willingly to fulfill what he has to do. I mean, you could imagine he's resolved to go with them, and yet they're acting like he's going to fight back, or I don't know, call his disciples to send up an army or something. Not only that, but this passage also shows that Jesus is the only one who is able to carry this burden and fulfill this task. You could see this from the fact that the disciples who came with him were asleep while he was praying. Okay, now some people might think that this might not be a big deal, since this would have happened probably very late at night, since it was after the Last Supper that Jesus went to Gethsemane. While it is true that you can sort of take that into consideration, it also reveals why people are unable to free themselves from sin and why Jesus needed to be sent. What Jesus says in verse 41 pretty much summarizes the reason. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. While Peter, James, and John did have the willingness and determination to follow Jesus, along with all of his other disciples, they were unable to do so during this dire time. Even though they declare that they will stay faithful to Jesus in the previous passage, it is shown that they are unable to truly free themselves from the temptations they face by themselves, essentially foreshadowing the fact that they will end up falling away from Jesus when he is betrayed by Judas Iscariot. The fact that they fell asleep during this time could also be seen as a reference to when God made the covenant with Abraham. If you guys recall, in order to seal this covenant during that time, Abraham and God were to perform a ritual that symbolized the sealing of the covenant by walking between 2 rows of animal pieces. Basically, you can consider this ritual to be the Old Testament version of the unbreakable vow in Harry Potter. You break the covenant, you pretty much die, or you're going to face a fate worth about the same as death, as shown by the animal pieces. Abraham was supposed to walk between the animal pieces with God in order to seal the covenant promise, but he fell asleep when the time came. God walked between the animal pieces in the form of a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch, meaning that God is the only one who is responsible for the completion of the covenant promise. With this understanding in mind, the fact that Peter, James, and John were asleep during this time acts as a way to show that Jesus is the only one who is able to complete the task that he has been sent to do. Jesus' willingness to do the will of God, even though it meant going through a difficult trial, is something that we as Christians need to understand. While there will be difficulties throughout our life, that is true, that doesn't mean that we should simply give up because it would be easier to avoid them. That also doesn't mean that we should willingly make our lives harder or think that people who don't suffer aren't true Christians, but that we are willing to go through these sufferings and these trials if it means that we are doing God's will. There will be times where we will face great difficulties and, let's be honest, have to deal with people who are either unwilling to listen or just simply don't care. But that doesn't mean we should just not do it. I mean, if you think about it, Jesus could have just done that. He could have just simply walked away at that night. He knew what was going to happen, yet He didn't because he knew that this was something that needed to be done and that it was according to God's will. That is what it means to be strong as a Christian and why Jesus Christ is our example. The willingness to follow God's will, even though you may face trials and difficulties along the way. Sure, it might be easier to just go with the logic of society, but the thing is, society is often nitpicky about what they consider to be acceptable, that they don't really have a real good logic to begin with. Also, God has shown that he does succeed in fulfilling his promises, as seen through Jesus' willingness to take on the wrath of God in order to free us from sin's grasp. Like it says in Colossians 1:13-14, "For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." Let us pray.